I am delighted to be here and to be one of many voices to speak about the situation that's happening not only in the United States but worldwide. I wish I could say that these troubles began with the murder of George Floyd, but we know, of course, that um, they began decades ago and they've continued on. And so what we're experiencing is kind of the perfect storm of events. The global pandemic and COVID-19 has disproportionately affected Black people in the United States in particular. And so the quite stunning statistics about the percentages of Blacks in particular, Black people in particular, who have died as a result of this virus. That was one thing. And then to add to this, the murder of, in succession, of innocent, unarmed Black people. Ahmaud Arbery was hunted down in broad daylight and shot by two former police officers in Georgia. Breonna Taylor was shot and killed in her apartment. And then, of course, George Floyd, who was essentially murdered by a police officer in broad daylight. And so all of these circumstances, on top of the global pandemic, have created the causes and conditions, and these are just some of the causes and conditions, systemic injustices, where we know the statistics, where Black people in particular suffer disproportionately from gun violence, from poverty, from lack of education, from lack of access to clean water, to safe housing. And so what you have is the situation that has become, for the Black community in particular, to the point where it is intolerable. And so even in the face of this disease that is COVID-19, people are willing to risk their life to say, this must stop. So I begin by acknowledging that our teacher, Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh, has offered to us, and not just Thich Nhat Hanh, but the entire Plum Village community, and the Vietnamese people and the Vietnamese culture that has produced and nurtured Thich Nhat Hanh. And so we're so lucky that we have these people who have created a path forward and a way for us to address this. And not only our beloved teacher and the beloved community that is Plum Village, but we have countless here in the United States, civil rights leaders like Ty's dear friend, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who gave us quite specific instructions in how to address injustice and violence. And what Dr. King said was never to succumb to the temptation of becoming bitter. As you press for justice, be sure to move with dignity and discipline, using only the instruments of love. And so what I'd like to share with you is very recently, maybe it was last week, I participated to an online meditation event led by a Black meditation teacher by the name of Ruth King. She's quite well known here in the United States. There were over 600 people gathered at that event. What was interesting, there was a question that emerged from the chat. And the question that emerged was, how do you fight injustice without hating? How do you fight injustice without hating? And again, I go back to the words that Dr. King said about how do we hold these injustices in our heart. And our beloved teacher has given us a tool and a path, really. And he has said and my practice is to be aware when the seed of anger and violence, which is being heavily watered now, when that seed is arising in me, I go back to my breath. I engage in mindful walking. Someone asked me the other day, how do you hold on to your breath when you're not walking in the forest, when you're not engaging in mindful walking in the woods? And I said to the person, I put the woods in my pocket. I walk with the woods and the forest in my pocket, and I breathe with the forest right in my pocket. And so part of this is remembering that I'm alive, that I have this breath, that I can breathe, and taking very good care when this energy of anger, rage comes up within me. I think our practice is our foundation. And one of the practices that I've relied on quite heavily is the practice of metta, of loving kindness. And so every day I spend a lot of time offering compassion and peace and ease and goodwill to the people who I believe are the cause of my suffering. And the reason for that is to recognize that my fate is interdependent with their fate, that we are really not separate. I practice with the sutras, and in particular, the 5 ways of putting an end to anger, to see even the tiniest bit of kindness in the people who I think are the cause of my anger and my rage and my suffering. So the firm base comes out of the base of our mindful breathing, our practice, the Sangha, the community. That is skillful action. And we need also to take engaged action. And so what does that engaged action looks like? What does that look like? Well, my training is as a lawyer, and not just a lawyer, but as a lobbyist, in advocating reform to laws that help to provide greater justice and peace in our society. And so I think as individuals, we might say, well, what can I do about systemic structures of injustice? Well, we can certainly vote, we can protest, we can advocate that for laws that will put an end to some of these things that are happening. So, for example, here in the United States, there is no national database for police officers who have committed these crimes. They can commit these crimes and then go to a neighboring state and be hired. This should not be happening. We need these kinds of checks and balances. We need to look at the laws that offer immunity to police officers. What is the kind of immunity that they should be granted? What is the federal standard of how we bring a lawsuit against police officers who are engaged in unlawful conduct? So we have the laws of this country as a vehicle to seek justice. And I just want to lift up the words of a member of the U.S. Congress. He is also a civil rights leader and walked with Dr. King, and that is Congressman John Lewis. And he has said, and I think it's true, that sometimes you have to get into trouble. Sometimes you have to get into necessary trouble, and not all trouble is bad trouble. And in this case, advocating for justice is very good trouble. Demonstration, protest that's the kind of trouble, good trouble, that is needed to eradicate discrimination, hatred, and violence. The first thing I would say is we need to look at the federal laws, the federal civil rights laws, and the standards, the legal standards for bringing these federal civil rights laws, federal civil rights cases in a court of law. What is the legal standard? That needs to be examined. The second is what is the level of immunity from liability that is allotted to law enforcement. That needs to be looked at again. The third, we do need a national database, and probably worldwide, so that people who commit crimes, that they are not able then to go to a neighboring state and commit crimes again. The fourth thing I would say is, and many of these may be in the nature of accountability of law enforcement. These are concrete steps. We also need training for law enforcement on community relations and on race relations. This is critically important. In this country, Black people in particular, and I would say people of color in general, and I know there are many other terms, Blacks are suffering from racialized trauma and overwhelm, and how this is affecting us as Black people on multiple levels. And if I could wave a magic wand to make this all go away, it would be for people to see the humanity of Black people, to be able to see us as human. And what this violence has done is it's dehumanizing us as Black people. And of course, because we are interdependent, this is not limited to Black people. And so there is a real need for a mindset, a shift in our mindset, an awakening, a way to wake up, to see our own humanity in all Black people, in all people. It's an important question. And really, the answer for that question came in my inbox of my computer by way of the Harvard Business Review. So it's not exactly, something that Black people produce. But what was really interesting here in the United States is that just dozens and dozens and hundreds of corporations, Fortune 500, Fortune 100, large and small companies all over, many are owned by white people, and they've called for very specific action. So I'd like to share with you what the Harvard Business Review just this week has said that they think people should do, and I fully agree with it. So again, this is not me, this is from the review. Decentering white people is important. Acknowledging what we do not know. Becoming aware of our defensive mindset. Avoiding sweeping generalizations. Offering space to Black and brown people. Creating a space for reflection and dialogue within your workplace, in your home. Racism, the Harvard Business Review said, is not Black people's problem. And inaction is tacit endorsement of the status quo. This is true. So the time has come for white people to no longer say, I'm one person, how can I address the systems and structures? I've just outlined several things that each one of us can do, that each one of us who identify as white, that we can do to address that. This is not the problem of Black people alone. We are interconnected. And so what affects me as on the historical dimension of my self-identified Blackness is going to affect everyone else because we're all connected. So it affects us not only on the historical, but on the ultimate dimension. So I would say that what can we do? We can begin with these things. We each have a role. Silence is equivalent to being complicit. And that may feel very strong for some people who may be frightened and who may say, I don't know what to do. And yet, our teacher has given us this path of bravery, of love and compassion. So we know that with compassion, it's not enough to just think about it, that we need to engage in skillful action. And sometimes that may be difficult. We might trip over ourselves a little bit, but it's important to start, to begin. That's what I would say. I have a lot of gratitude to the Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh, to the Plum Village community, to the Vietnamese people, and to Vietnamese culture for producing this great being that is our teacher for our time and for the world. And I'm very grateful to the Sangha and to the Plum Village community for producing this video. It's very much needed. We, as Black and Brown people, we are in the fight of our lives. And to address this, we need the power of love. So thank you.